Good day everyone and welcome to my Bombblade guide for 2024. I'm making this guide right now because it's about to be Major Mayhem again, which is an excellent time to try out bombing, and I know there's a lot of people that are curious as to how to use scribing skills in bombing, so I want to answer that with this video as well. I'm also not expecting that many changes to Bombblade in general for the rest of the year because we've had the scribing, which is the main part of what changes this year, already coming out, and there's still a PvP update coming out, but I don't expect that to change specifically bombing builds that much. So in this guide I'm going to go over 2 builds that I think are the meta on Bombblade right now specifically that you can use, and I also want to do a small section of honorable mentions with things that are maybe worth considering but I didn't end up using in the end. The builds that I present here are also on the website in case you want a written version of this. But with this introduction out of the way, I'm going to start with the first build. And that first build is what I call the classic Bombblade, because it has been derived from a very old way of bombing, where it's simply with proximity detonation and soul tether and then sap essence as a spammable. Recently, this has not been so competitive due to Carve Bombing, which is the second build, being better than it in basically almost all situations. But now with specifically the skill Elemental Explosion coming out, this is a huge amount of upfront burst that goes really nicely with this classic Bombblade kind of setup. So I've updated it to a version that I think is competitive with Carve Bombing and that shines in its own right as well. So for this build, for the sets, I have 5 pieces of Vicious Death on the front bar with a Berserker enchant and the sharpened trait Lightning Staff. On the back bar I have a random greatsword of a set that gives magic recovery on the 2-piece. So an example of that is Eternal Vigor, another example that is Seducer. The trait doesn't matter that much. If you really want to min-max you can go with Decisive to get the ultimate a little bit faster, but it's no big issue. And then on the 5-piece set on the body I have Dagon's Dominion, and as a monster set I have 2 pieces of Balog, a classic for Bombblade of course. For the traits on the armor I have Full Divines and Magicka enchantments, and the traits on the jewelry are triple infused spell damage enchantments. I think this is pretty straightforward everything here. You have the bombing set with Vicious Death, Balog, and then a damage set. I've chosen the Dagon's Dominion because I think it's quite potent for a build that's where literally everything that it does is an area of effectability. There is definitely other options you can use as well. For example, you can do Plague Break to have an even bigger explosion when something dies. I didn't choose to do that because, in my opinion, when something dies from your bomb, the explosion from just Vicious Death is already big enough to get a chain reaction going, but it's worth considering. There's also Oakfather's Retribution, which can give pretty high stats when you fight groups of good players that have a lot of buffs active. But personally I'm focusing a little bit more on killing a squishy player and then using that to get a chain reaction going to also kill the good players with that. And that's something that Dagon's Dominion is just a straightforward good set for as well. Another option is New Moon Acolyte, which is very similar but just gives you weapon and spell damage to all your abilities rather than just your area of effect abilities. But what I'm saying is that these sets don't matter too much as long as you have something that just buffs your overall damage done. Then for the skills, the front bar is Camouflaged Hunter, Power Extraction, Merciless Resolve, Healthy Offering, Fiery Explosion, Soul Tether, and on the back bar I have Shadowy Disguise, Channel Acceleration, Proximity Detonation, Full Momentum, Magical Contingency, and Barrier. So to explain the skills a little bit, I'm going to start with the front bar. Fire Explosion is the reason that I think this build is competitive in this patch with Carve Bombing as well, because this is a lot of upfront burst. You have a tooltip here of an easy 17 or 18k. It's flame damage as well, and for now everybody is still vampire, so everybody takes more flame damage. Then it's also going to apply the 3 stats effect, so that's even more of a proc of damage on top of that. And then the debuff that it applies to the enemies is really powerful as well with Minor Brittle. You can also go for Off Balance if you want, and then go for the Champion Point Exploiter, which is going to give 10% more damage done to Off Balance to enemies. But I didn't go for that because I think having Minor Brittle and then your Champion Point being free for any other damage increase is more efficient than doing it with Off Balance and Exploiter. The heal I have here is Healthy Offering. This can also be a scribing skill if you want. You can use Wield Soul and then put whatever buffs you want on that. It doesn't matter too much, so I didn't bother changing that. The spammable is also variable, so I have Power Extraction here, but you can also make this, for example, Sap Essence if you want to heal on top of that. Soul Burst skill also from the Skybing skill line, but as long as you have some spammable that is going to deal damage just to finish off the enemies in case that Soul Tether and Fire Explosion and Proximity Detonation weren't enough, any of those kind of spammables will do. Bursters, you don't use that, it's just for the passive here to get you 300 weapon and spell damage. And then on the back bar, Channel Acceleration and Forward Momentum are just there to keep up at all times, so this is just for buffs. And then Fire or Magical Contingency here, I have Magic Damage, then Warrior's Opportunity and Minor Breach. You can also go with Fire Damage, maybe that's marginally better, but that's whatever, it's no big deal because this is not the larger part of your damage. Warrior's Opportunity is quite nice to have though, because it's going to increase the damage with the base value, which is often a very strong modifier to damage dealt. And Minor Breach is also a really nice debuff to have, so this is something that I want to use as well. There's also an option to go with Minor Vulnerability here, but since with Fiery Contingency I already have Minor Vulnerability from the Concussion stats effect that is going to proc, it's better to go with Minor Breach. The backbar ultimate is Barrier. This is just here for the support passive, which is going to give me extra Magicka regeneration. Where is it? Here, Magicka 8. And this on top with the 2-piece Seducer or 2-piece Eternal Vigor Greatsword is quite a boost of Magicka regeneration on the back bar, and that's just going to help you move around more together with, for example, Vampire level 4. For the champion points, the blue CPs are Master at Arms, Fighting Finesse, Biting Aura and Backstabber. This can be changed out to Exploiter if you want and if you have the right script on the Fiery Explosion. And then for the red CP I have Celerity, Pain's Refuge, Rejuvenation and Boundless Vitality. Pain's Refuge here is also a flex spot, you can make that whatever you want. For the auxiliary stuff, my race is a High Elf. Khajiit is probably optimal for this, to just put crit damage as much as you can. For the attributes, right now I've gone with 40 into health and 24 Magicka. This really is up to the individual player, how you switch the attributes around. Right now I have a mixture of survivability with health and damage with Magicka. If you're very comfortable in bombing and you don't get hit much outside of that, and you're really good at choosing your selection of how to bomb and getting away quickly, then you can choose going for 64 points into Magicka to maximize your damage. If you're still learning to bomb and you get revealed more often, then I think it's better to go with 64 points into health, just so that you don't get killed every time somebody just looks at you. You have a little bit more time to try and run away. You can see the stats here as well. The mounts that I have is the Shadow. For the food I have Ozorka Smoked Bear Haunch. This is kind of the same issue as with the attribute points, where you can choose this depending on your own preferences. If you want to maximize damage, you should go with Ghastly Eyeball. If you want a mix of more damage and survivability, you can also go with Witchmother's Potent Brew. Or if you want to have a little bit more stamina regeneration on top of that as well, you can go with Smoked Bear Haunch. I like to do that simply because when I get discovered every now and then or after a bomb, it helps me get away quicker, and I also don't have as many issues sneaking around and getting my stamina back quickly. Plus, I think that the extra maximum Magicka is not going to be a huge deal in whether a bomb will be successful or not at all. And then for the potions that I use any kind of potion that gives immovability and unstoppable, and the cheapest option here is the Alliance Health Drought, which is just going to give you health, invisibility and immovability. It's important to have a potion that gives you invisibility, because otherwise if you try and cast Fiery Contingency and cast any skill, it's already going to fire. Well, you don't want that, so I cast Magical Contingency, that's the one, and then the potion right after, so I don't proc it by accident. And then it's also important to have something that gives immovability, because there's a lot of people that use, for example, Revealing Flare that can stun you, or other random stuns that they put on the ground. So you don't want that to happen to you while you go into a bomb, because then it's just going to fail automatically. And thus it's good to have something that gives you immovability. So that's the potion that I use in my rotation. And then speaking of rotation, I'm going to showcase this as well with a very simple clip where I just bomb 3 enemies. It's the exact same mechanic that you use to bomb 10 or 20 enemies, but I want to show it with this clip because it is only a very few amount of enemies, which makes it much easier to see what exactly that I'm doing. So first of all, you need to keep your buffs up, so Channel Acceleration, Forward Momentum, and then you move closer to the place that you want to bomb. First you cast Proximity Detonation, then you cast Fiery Contingency or Magical Contingency, whatever damage buff that you have, and immediately after that you cast that with the potion, giving you immovability and invisibility, and that's going to give you a minimal amount of time in the open where people can see you. After that, you run into the group and you want to make sure to arrive into the group about right when the proximity detonation is going to explode, and you want it to happen when you are casting Fiery Explosion. So here you see I arrived in the group and I get ready to cast the Fiery Explosion. I do this, and then immediately afterwards I also cast Soul Tether, so it's a combo with that, and then Proxy Det explodes right after that as well. This timing is really nice because Proxy Det is also going to benefit from the penetration I get from Balork this way. But basically this way you have 3 very hard hitting skills with Fiery Explosion, Proximity Detonation and Soul Tether hitting at the same time, which is a very satisfying part about this build. And then afterwards, if some people did not die yet, what you can do is just use your spammable once or twice, in my case Power Extraction, and doing this might just finish somebody off like it did here as well. And then afterwards, you want to disengage. So you do not do more than just cast the spammable once or twice. After that, it's time to move out. If your bomb did not work, it's no problem, you just try it again later. But you have to move out in order to be able to try it again later instead of having to ride back to whatever location you were in. And you do that simply by bar swapping again to the back bar, going in cloak and moving out of the place that you just bombed. I also like this clip because it really nicely showcases where this bombing build is the most effective, and that is in locations where enemies are already stacked and are standing still. For example, when repairing a keep wall or repairing a keep gate, or when they are standing on a resource, or when they are sieging on a ram. That's really the situations that you want to go for when bombing with this build. People have to already be stacked and standing still in order for you to have a good bomb with this build. But when that happens, this build really shines in dealing a high amount of instant burst with 3 high hitting abilities and then getting out immediately afterwards as the bomb occurred. Anyway, so now for the second build, which is one that I've already presented before as well for sure, which is the Carve Bombing build. In this build, the idea is to have on the front bar the Master's Perfected Battle Axe, on the back bar 5 pieces of Dark Conversions, and then double barred you want to have Vicious Death. As a monster set or mythic, there's different options. I go with Prioritieric because I quite like having the unique mechanic of this, but you can also, for example, go with a 1-piece Mora's Whispers and a 1-piece damage set of choice, for example, Molakina. Or you can also go with Balork, of course, if you have a different ultimate than what I'm running right here. Anyway, as for the traits, it's all the same as in previous build, so you want to have full Defiance, max magic enchantments, 3 infused spell damage enchantments. Now on the back bar I have an infused Berserker enchant. This is important here because this is a part of the rotation that gives a big damage boost. And on the front bar I have the Nirnhound Sorcery Draining Poison. So starting with the trait, Nirnhound is here because I already get a lot of penetration because of the ultimate that I run, but if you don't have that, you can run Sharpened as well. And then the poison, basically the important part is that it's going to have a chance to give me minor sorcery, which is a 10% spell damage increase, which is really nice to have. It will not be active every bomb for sure, but still having this in some of your bombs is a really nice buff. For the skills, I have on the back bar Shadowy Disguise, Channel Acceleration, Proximity Detonation, Concealed Weapon, Fire Explosion and Barrier. And then on the front bar I have Merciless Resolve, Brawler, Forward Momentum, Healthy Offering, Camouflage Hunter and Onslaught. You see a lot of skills coming back from the previous build, so I'm not going to explain that again. But I do want to mention that the main spammable that is important to run here is Brawler. I like this morph, which gives me a damage shield as well, and this in combination with the Master 2H is going to be a really nice synergy with Dark Conversions, where everybody's going to be stacked. You're going to have a lot of benefit from the Master 2H, and thus you are going to deal a lot of damage with Brawler. The ultimate that I use is Onslaught. This is going to give me a lot of penetration, which I really like for this bombing build, because I basically, especially if I hit a tanky target, then I'm going to have as much penetration as I could possibly wish, and that also allows me to push damage with, for example, the Nirnhound trait or another monster set elsewhere as well. But if you want to have a little bit more survivability for getting out of the bomb, another really good skill to run is, like in the previous build, Soul Tether. I also want to mention Concealed Weapon here. This is a skill that I did not have in the previous build, but I do have it here. It's just there for the passive, going to give me some minor expedition while I'm running around, which just helps me to catch up the groups while I'm in sneak. And that goes really nice with where this bomb build shines as well, which I will explain in a second. The Fire Explosion skill is the exact same as before. This is also going to proc Dark Conversions. Sometimes this skill by itself is also going to kill some enemies, and I know sometimes I've heard from people that this is not ideal and that this way your bomb gets kind of messy, and I understand that because sometimes you kill a squishy player with just this skill and then afterwards you pull the tanky players in, and then sometimes the bomb is a bit weird. But I've had plenty of cases where this has also been very beneficial because of the strong debuffs that it applies with minor vulnerability, minor brittle, and so forth. Which means that I'm going to leave the choice of skill to proc dark conversions with up to you, the viewer. I've had successful bombs with both Fiery Explosion and Volcanic Rune, which is the other skill that I use if I don't have Fiery Explosion, or well, in this case it's Scalding Rune. So yeah, that's it for the skills. For the champion points, it's basically the exact same as before. I will just go over it visually right now. And then for the auxiliary stuff, it's all mainly the same as before as well. Same attributes, same food, same mundus, and so forth. Which then brings me to a showcase of the combo. I have showcased this combo and this build in the previous video as well, where I have a lot more players. But in this case, I also want to show it again with a fewer amount of players, so it's clear what I'm doing. The start of this combo is the exact same as in the previous build, where you just want to keep your buffs up, so with channel acceleration and full momentum. Then afterwards you run towards the group that you want to go and bomb. As you come closer to that group, you cast Proximity Detonation, and then immediately afterwards you use the Invisibility and Immovability potion. If you have Fire Contingency or Magical Contingency instead of Concealed Weapon, you cast that before using the potion as well, just the same way, and then you have a little extra damage boost. I prefer having Concealed Weapon here because it allows me to move in faster to move in groups, which is what this build shines in. And then afterwards I run into the group. I open up like in the previous build with Fire Explosion, but now it's from the back bar. Right when that casts, you also cast a light attack, after which you bar swap. And then as the enemies are being pulled into the center of Dark Conversions, you follow this up with your ultimate, in my case Onslaught. And that then is going to give you all the penetration that you're going to need. Ideally, Proximity Detonation explodes right afterwards, and then you cast just Brawler to finish people off. You cast this like in the previous build just once or twice, and then you move away as quickly as possible again, like this. Here I got stunned by accident, but luckily I was still able to get away, thanks to, for example, doing a quick direction change after going into invisibility. But that's the combo for this build. What this shines in is, like I said, also bombing moving groups. So you can do the same bombs as in the previous build, for example with keep door repairs or on resource flags, but this here is also way more flexible in the situation that you want to use it. Also in the middle of Cyrodiil, if you see some group that is kind of tightly stacked together and moving around fast, you can also use this build more efficiently, especially when you also have Volcanic Rune or Scalding Rune instead of Fire Explosion. And if you have Concealed Weapon, which allows you to move around faster. And that way you can, and that is thanks to Dark Conversions, which is going to pull enemies into the center, even if they are a bit further away and not that stacked. One drawback that this does have is that Dark Conversion is not going to pull in enemies that are mounted. So if you happen to find a bunch of people that are on horseback, on a flag, for example, waiting for it to be captured, if you use Dark Conversions on them, they will not stack in the center. It does not work then. And then, for example, I think you're better off using the classic Bombblade build. Anyway, that's it for this build as well. So for the honorable mention, what I just want to say is a word on Ranged Bombblade. Because Ranged Bombblade was a spec that was very popular like 2 years or so ago, but it has been changed, or let's say nerfed, because of Dark Conversions no longer pulling enemies when you cast it from elevation. What that means is that when you're on top of a keep tower, or on top of a resource tower, or on top of a large rock, and you cast Dark Conversions down below on a stack of enemies, it's actually not even going to function. It's not going to pull enemies in. And that was a really important part of ranged bombing. It is still going to work when you are on the same elevation as your enemies, so when you're just on a flat field and you cast it from maximum range at those enemies, it will still pull enemies, and then you can still use that. But in my opinion, not being able to use it on top of a tower or something kind of defeats the purpose, where you are in a faraway place and from a faraway range try and bomb the enemies. And that's the reason that range bombing no longer works anymore. Now in this match they have added Fire Explosion, which I have talked about a lot already, but it's a high amount of upfront burst that can be cast from range. So this also makes range bombing a little bit viable again, where you can, for example, combine that with Elemental Ring as a spammable on a Nightblade, or when you are on an auto class, for example Necromancer, you can combine that with the Colossus ultimate, which is a lot of burst together with Fire Explosion. And I imagine in that case, even without torque conversions or anything like that, you can get quite a few kills off as well. But in my opinion, this is in no situation better than going with the two builds that I just presented, especially on Nightblade, where you don't really have an ultimate that goes well with this. On other classes, like Necromancer, like I said, you do have that, but then you have the drawback of not being able to move around as efficiently as on Nightblade with Cloak. So that means that range bombing is a little more viable again, but still not viable enough for me to run it consistently over the builds that I just provided. Anyway, I thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll enjoy bombing in Major Mayhem if you choose to pick up any of this, and I will see you next time. Bye.